Growing up, my mom was a single mother, so she was working a lot of the times when we were growing up. We were moving a lot, so I was actually born in Arizona, moved to Nebraska for a couple of years, and then when my grandpa passed away, we moved to South Dakota on the western side. So growing up on the western side for a couple of years, moved to a couple of schools during that time. My mom met my stepdad, Tim, and then we moved to Emory, South Dakota, and we've been living in Emory, South Dakota for about 10 years. But growing up, we didn't really go to church. We didn't really talk about God. So there wasn't really learning about him. Every once in a while, they would mention his name, but there was never really any further explanation. I didn't know my real dad. I didn't know his name, and I didn't know what he looked like. I didn't know who he was. And so I would ask my mom a lot of the times, who he was, what he was like, and she always kind of just put it off, and she told me that she would tell me when I was older. And so it was always in the back of my mind, just knowing, or not knowing who my dad was. I know as a kid, you always feel like your parents are part of who you are, and so it kind of played in just feeling sad because I thought I was missing part of myself. So when we moved to Emory, I made a couple of friends. I think it was in high school when I started going to youth group. I got invited to go with a friend, and I started to finally learn more about who God was, who Jesus was, what Jesus did for us, and I never really started believing in it or anything. I just thought that I just wasn't sure. I was skeptical, you could say. So I just never really looked into it. But just throughout growing up and living, I always just thought about my dad and who he was. And at one point when we were living in Emory, I brought it up to my mom, and she realized I was probably old enough to know about him and to know who he was and what kind of person he was. My mom set me down at the kitchen table. It was around summertime of, I want to say 2012. My sister was there with me, and my mom, and so my mom just started to explain how my dad was like and how he was nice when he was sober, which wasn't very often. When he wasn't sober, he did a lot of not so good things. He wanted a child, but she was opposed to the idea just because of how the situation went and was, and how she knew that it wouldn't be the right kind of situation to have a child in. Unfortunately, she didn't get her way. He forced himself onto her, and a couple of weeks later, she found out that she was pregnant with me. She went to the doctors after finding out that she was pregnant, and the doctors were doing checkups, and they actually found cervical cancer, and they wanted her to abort me so that they could treat it right away. But she didn't. She didn't want them to. She wanted them to wait, and she actually wanted to have me. So she went through the pregnancy. She had to get multiple shots, and like steroids, or I don't know what kind of medicine, but she had to get multiple shots so that the cancer wouldn't progress. And they pushed for as long as they could, until like I had to be born. On March 7th, and my original due date was May 6th. But after she got done telling me everything about what my dad did, and like what she went through the pregnancy, and like how she said that I saved her life in a way, because she would have never found out that she had cervical cancer if she wouldn't have gotten pregnant with me. We were, all three of us were like crying around the table. But I always held that guilt of what my dad did to her. Just because that's a pain no one should go through. Especially my mom. She's like the most amazing person ever. And the fact that she decided to keep me after going through that, and then finding out that she has cervical cancer, was just bewildering to me. My mindset after hearing everything was not good. It was very shameful. I felt like my family, every time they looked at me, they saw what my dad did, and they saw the pain that my mom went through. And in my head, I thought they were asking, was it really worth it? And so it got to the point where my shame grew too much, and I had it in my mind, I had it set in my mind that I would have to be dealt the pain that my mom went through, because that's just how it is. And so I harmed myself. Not a lot, but just enough. And that went on for a couple of months. I don't know exactly how long, but it went on throughout this bad state. One day in particular, it was really, really, really bad. I was just in my head a lot, really shameful, and the Lord knows how Satan plays on shame, but you just have it in your mind that you don't deserve any love, and you don't deserve anything, really. And that day in particular was really hard, and I was so tired and so weak of fighting myself and fighting those shameful thoughts, and just being closed off to the world, because no one knew what was going on, no one knew how I felt, and no one knew what I was doing to myself. So I kept it all in. I didn't tell anybody, I didn't tell any friends. And so one night I was just sick of it, and sick of feeling that way, and because I was going to youth group at the time, and I got the baseline of who God was and who Jesus was, I started praying, and I just basically poured my heart out. I told him what was going on, I told him how I was feeling, I told him what I was doing, and how I wanted it to stop. And then I got to the point of how I really didn't want to look like my dad. Just because I didn't want my mom to look at me and see him. Because I didn't want her to relate me to him, who caused her all that pain and suffering. And so I asked God to show me a picture of my dad, which wasn't possible because when we were living in the west side of South Dakota, we had a big flood with one of our storage units, and it ruined like all of my baby pictures. It ruined just like a lot of things in general, but like the pictures that my mom had of like my dad were all ruined. And so it wasn't possible. There was no way, because at that time my dad had passed away when I was 7. Don't know how, but he passed away, so there was no way that I would be able to see what my dad looked like, or to see like if I looked like him. And so I just asked, and after asking, I said that if you could make that happen, then I would know for sure that you are real and that you heard me and that I'm meant to follow you. After I got done saying what I needed to say, I fell asleep. It was very fast. I just passed out. And I woke up the next morning to my mom knocking on my door, my bedroom door. And I opened it, and she's holding the shoebox. And she said that she didn't know why she was looking through her stuff yet last night, but she was looking through her stuff, and she found undeveloped film of pictures of me and my dad. Like, guys, there's no way that could have happened, because all of those pictures got ruined in the flood. Like, I started crying, obviously, and my mom probably thought that it was because I would finally get to see my dad, and it was partly because I wanted to make sure I didn't look like him, but another part of me, like, I finally felt heard and understood, and I felt love for the first time in a long time that I could accept. After that, like, it wasn't like it was instant healing and instant, like, salvation. It was more or less, like, I knew that there was a God out there and that Jesus was real and that I was meant to follow him, but I still had a lot of healing to do with myself. I had friends at the time, but they were more or less like school friends, like you would hang out with them, but wasn't like true friendship. So I kind of got like closed off with a lot of people just because I was trying to find myself again, and that's hard to do when you have to put up a front with everybody. I got the opportunity to go to my grandma's and what she calls was her man friend for the summer, and I took that opportunity and ran with it. I knew I needed to get away from Emory. That summer I learned a lot about love and about Jesus and about God, and I learned a lot about myself and how I can be independent and how I can actually start to love myself. My grandma and Ray were so wonderful in being patient with me and they would like tell me stories, and they would just talk about God and be so open about that, and it really helped. I started looking more into it, and I started asking questions, and he was a really sweet guy. And my grandma and him got me a Bible. And I was staying in a camper outside of their house just to give me a little more privacy. So that night I went to my camper and I read the first few pages of the Bible. I guess you could say I fully understood and fully accepted what Jesus did for me that night. And that night, as I was sitting in my bed crying and reading those first few pages, I gave myself to Christ. Best day ever, if you tell me. Ending that summer when I had to say goodbye to my grandma and Ray, Ray was hugging me, and we were so close together that he called me his granddaughter when I left, and he was my grandpa. Lost contact with a lot of people from Emory, so it was practically like me starting at a new school, and I'm the new kid, and trying to rebuild friendships in a way. And I kind of did, but again, it was more or less like that school type friendship. And so a lot of the times I was keeping to myself, and I was just keeping, still trying to fully heal from the situation. And I was still going to youth group at the time, and youth group opened up an opportunity for us to go on a missions trip, and I looked at the price and I knew instantly no way, can't afford that, not going. But the youth pastor's wife, she asked me if I didn't have to worry about money if I would go. And I said, of course, absolutely I would go, just because I really like traveling. And she said, all right, then you're going. And not gonna lie, I was more excited about going to California and going to the beaches and that aspect of it. I didn't really think about serving and being with people who believe in Jesus and believe in God, and listening to sermons every day of who Jesus and God were and what they've done for us. I didn't think about that, but God had a very big plan for that missions trip. One of the nights for the missions trip there was a sermon about forgiveness, and it was just letting go of what has happened in your past so you can move on in the future, and you don't have to let that hold you back anymore. And of course, I started crying right then and there, because it's one of those messages where you know that the pastor was specifically talking to you. God gave him that message, and then it was God was speaking to you through him. And it was one of those. And so that night, as I was crying and praying, I forgave my dad. So after that service, I pulled the youth pastor's wife over, and we went into a little room, and I told her everything. She was the first person to know everything, and she was the first person to know everything except for the harming self part. I didn't tell anybody about that until now. She then prayed with me, and she just gave me words of encouragement, And after that night, I felt like the weight of the world was lifted off my shoulders. I felt so much better and so relieved and just healed quite a bit from that. Moving on from there, it was kind of like I was stuck in a way. I didn't know what I was going to do after I was healed a bunch. And so I didn't know what to do, and I didn't know how to do it, and I don't think I had the right resources to figure it out either. I was a lot on my own just because my family didn't know, and I didn't know how to go up to a pastor and be like, how do you be more godly? And so it was kind of like a frozen moment in my faith for a couple of years. In 2015, my grandma's man friend, Ray, he unfortunately passed away. Which was really hard on everyone, including my grandma. She was practically heartbroken. And so in April of 2015, we had his funeral and everything. And then I practically just, I told my mom and dad that I was going to live with my grandma for the summer before my last year of high school and last year of high school. And so I moved up in Wyoming in May of 2015. Moving up there, my grandma was going to a new church, and they kind of gave me a new light and kind of gave me a bit of direction as well. And so I kind of learned a little more about how to be godly. After last year of high school, it was to college. In college, I started to get some friends, and unfortunately, I unintentionally put God on the back burner there. In a way, they were a bad influence, but at the same time, I had the choice to do what I did. So we would be like drinking, not a good thing. They would like smoke cigars in the car. So they weren't very like good role models or good influences, you could say. So I kind of got blinded, and I kind of got like high on friendship. And so going through that, not really following God, you get hurt a lot, and it's kind of like, it's like I knew it. So after Christmas break, I, in a way, kind of like started breaking off from the pack, but I got kind of like depressed because I wanted that friendship, and I wanted to have like those kind of connections, but I didn't want to do it in a bad way. But at the same time, I wanted friendship, but I wanted it in the right way. But having to seclude myself from people that I got to know pretty well throughout the first semester of college was kind of hard on me. And And so after getting super depressed and throughout that semester, like, it just progressively got worse, and I didn't want it to get to the point of where it was when I was in the depressed state after hearing what my dad did to my mom. And so after that semester, I took liberty of just moving back home near my mom and dad. I moved in with my sister in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And after moving in with my sister, like, I didn't have any friends back in South Dakota, so I was like still in the depressed state, and I didn't know what to do. And so I talked to my mom about it, and she actually recommended me a doctor. And so I went to the doctor, and they did all like the testing, and I got a prescription, and it did work, but there was still something missing, and I didn't know what that was until one day I was just sitting there thinking about what was going on when a light bulb went off, and I realized, like, when was the last time I prayed? When was the last time I said to God, like, thank you? And like, I just realized that I put him on the back burner, and after realizing that, I started getting into my word, started reading my Bible more, and eventually me and my sister started to go to New Life Church in Sioux Falls. A year and a half after moving to Sioux Falls and getting more into the Bible and more into like going to church and stuff, I got baptized on August 19th of 2018. I didn't know it was going to happen that day. I did see baptism pop up quite a bit the previous month, and I knew it was going to happen. I just didn't know when it was going to happen, and I didn't know if it was going to be like this time or the next time, or like the time after that. But so the way they do baptisms is they give the message, and then at the end of the message, they ask if anybody would like to get baptized, to stand up if they would like to get baptized. And when they ask that, the next thing I know is I'm standing up. So I just rolled with it, and I got baptized. The reason I got baptized, I don't know, God worked through my life a lot throughout that year and a half I was living in Sioux Falls. I went from being depressed to like finally feeling like I can live again and that I can like be myself, and I felt like I found myself again. And so I think in my heart, like my heart knew that, I knew that, and God was just like, it's your time. It's the time to shine. So I just got baptized. After that, a lot of things happened. So my sister met her boyfriend in March of 2018, and they got to know each other very well over the next year. And my sister went and visited him. He lived in Clarksville, Tennessee. And so after she visited him a couple of times, she kind of brought up the idea of moving down there. And she asked if I would like to move down there with her as well. And so I said yes. I took that opportunity just because I love traveling and I love experiencing new things. And so from September of 2018 to January of 2018, we were constantly looking for housing down here, and at the end of the month of January, we took a trip down here and we looked into jobs, and we got back to Sioux Falls. We set the date that we were moving in February of 2018, end of February. And so moving down here, end of February, we moved down here with enough money for a week of Airbnb, a deposit on a house, and first month's rent. The struggle was on. We had to put all of our faith in God that He would provide, which He did. So I got a job, and we got the housing papers. We signed them, we got into the apartment, but the struggle was still on because my sister wasn't having very much luck with finding a job, and so it was a very hectic week. My sister got a call from a job, and they really wanted her to come and visit, and she eventually accepted the job, and we were pretty much set after that. So after struggling with that, and for a while we struggled with money just because moving halfway across the country is kind of difficult, especially with two young adults. So struggled a little bit with that, but from March until July, I didn't go to church. I really wanted to, but I just couldn't find one. I eventually, ironically, drove past this church called Life Church. And it caught my eye, not only because it was New Life Church to Life Church, it was just kind of clicked. But we drove by it every day because we were carpooling with coworkers. And I just knew that was the church that I was going to go to. I just needed to work up the courage to go by myself. So it was the middle of July, middle of their at the movies thing, and so at the movies event, and so I went, and practically that was like home. I went and that was home, and I just knew from then on that was a church that I was going to be attending for a long time. I really wanted to progress and do something more, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. So youth group kept popping up, and just me remembering my time in youth group, and so I saw their open door service and forgot to go for the first time, and then someone came up to me and said that I should really go to the open door service, and so their next one is the one I went to, and they actually had a little segment for their switch leaders, which is their youth group, and I practically just signed up that night, and then I signed up for a life group. Highly recommend. After a couple weeks of being a leader with Switch, I got a message on Facebook from the youth pastor saying that he would if I would like to serve the loop service on Sundays, which is just the 4th through 6th graders Sunday service, where it kind of helps them transition into youth group. And so I took that opportunity, and I am now just living over by Nashville, and I'm living a life that I can wake up with peace in my heart, and to know that no matter what happens today, tomorrow, or 5 years from now, I know that God will be with me, and I'm just excited to see what He has next for me.